Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to go over our Blaze to QuickBooks connector. We're going to explain to you what it is, the benefits that you will hopefully get from using the connector, along with the current features. We're also going to jump in and take a look at the transactions that we create both in QuickBooks Desktop and in QuickBooks Online. Let's get started. What is the Blaze to QuickBooks connector? This is a tool that we've created to get your accounting data out of Blaze and into QuickBooks. We're using the Blaze API to pull the data out of QuickBooks and the QuickBooks SDK to get that data into QuickBooks Desktop and the QuickBooks API to get it into QuickBooks Online. Using the connector, you can import your accounting activity into QuickBooks in minutes. We're creating a daily summary of your sales in QuickBooks Online. We're doing that with an invoice and payments. In QuickBooks Desktop, we're doing that with a sales receipt. We're also creating a cost of goods sold journal entry to reduce your inventory and increase your cost of goods. And we're also recording vendor bills based on your Blaze POs. We can import this activity either daily, weekly, or monthly, no matter when you run it. We are going to create a daily summary of your sales, and then we'll create a bill for each PO that you have in Blaze. The benefits of using the connector are that it does work with both QuickBooks Desktop and Online. It's fast and easy to use, and we do have a flexible mapping that allows you to import data the way that you want to. You also have the ability to track your sales by product type, as well as separating that out by adult use and medical use. Some of the key features of using the connector. We are creating a daily summary of your Blaze sales activity in both QuickBooks Online or QuickBooks Desktop, no matter how frequently you run the connector. As I mentioned, in QuickBooks Desktop, we're creating a sales receipt, a cost of goods sold journal entry, and a bill for each one of your completed purchase orders over in Blaze. In QuickBooks Online, we're creating an invoice along with payments and then a cost of goods sold journal entry and those vendor bills. We are recording sales by product category, and then as I mentioned, you do have the ability to break that out by adult use and medical use if you choose. On the sales receipt or invoice that we create, we are also recording your discounts that have been given to the customer, products that have been returned to the dispensary, your Blaze Pay card fees if you're using Blaze Pay, delivery fees if you charge them to the customer, rounding amounts if you've chosen to use rounding within Blaze. We also capture your taxes and all your different payment methods that are used within the dispensary. We're also tracking your inventory value and cost of goods sold. The connector does not track inventory quantities, and we do not track individual products. We're simply tracking a inventory value at a summary level at the Blaze product category level. Another option that you have is to include your excise tax within the value of your inventory, or you can track this separately in a separate GL account. You also have the option of utilizing QuickBooks class tracking. This is extremely useful if you have multiple dispensaries importing into a single QuickBooks file. It allows you to run financial statements by class or to see the organization as a whole. Now let's jump in and take a look at the transactions that we have both in QuickBooks Desktop and in QuickBooks Online, and then we'll take a look at the connectors themselves. Here in QuickBooks Online, we have our invoice. At the top portion of our invoice, we can see our different product types. As I mentioned, we have a summary of what those totals are for each product type. Because of the way that we have our settings, these are our gross sales by product type. And it's our gross sales because we've chosen to show our discounts and our product returns as separate line items on the invoice. So here under the subtotal, we have our discounts and our returns. Following our discounts and our returns, we have our taxes. These are the different taxes that are returned by Blaze. Here in our example, we only have a couple different tax types, but if we had excise tax, whether it's arm's length or non-arm's length, we would see those numbers as well. If you've chose to do rounding within Blaze, we are going to bring that round amount, whether it's a positive or negative number at the end of the day. We're going to bring that in here also at a summary level. And then finally, we have an offset item. This offset is typically a small amount, and it usually is only accommodating a sales tax rounding discrepancy because we are rounding at the daily level versus the transaction by transaction level. Like I said, this often leads to a slight rounding difference between the data that we're getting from Blaze and what ends up in QuickBooks. In addition to the invoice, we also have a payment for each one of the payment methods that was processed at the dispensary. This could be cash and Blaze Pay. This could be a different debit processor. It just all depends on what's being utilized at the dispensary. Over in the connector, you will get to map the payment method in the deposit to account, and again, we automatically apply that to the invoice. the goal at the end of the day will be to have an invoice that has a zero balance because we've received in all of the different payment methods and applied them here to the invoice. Here we have our cost of goods sold journal entry. As you can see in my setup, I have a single inventory asset account, but I have a cost of goods sold account for each one of the product categories that we've sold. The connector gives you the ability to have any combination of asset and cost of goods sold combinations that you choose. And the final transaction that we're creating here in QuickBooks are the vendor bills. Here we can see an example. Because I only had a single inventory asset account set up, I only get a single line on my bill. If I purchased multiple different product types, I would end up with an individual line per product type, even if I only have a single inventory asset account mapped. So if we purchased both flour and edibles from the same vendor, we would have two lines here on our bill. And if we did pay the vendor excise tax, that excise tax would also appear here on the bill. But within the settings of the connector for this demo data, we chose to include the excise tax within the inventory value. So in that case, we do not get a separate excise tax line. It's all simply showing as our inventory asset value. So this bill will increase our inventory value, and that journal entry for the cost of goods sold will reduce the inventory and increase our cost of goods. That's it for QuickBooks Online. Now let's take a quick look over at QuickBooks Desktop. Here in QuickBooks Desktop, rather than an invoice and separate payments, we have a single sales receipt that has our payment methods down at the bottom, and we'll take a look at that here real quick. Again, we have the top portion is a summary of all of our different product types and the gross sales for those. We have our subtotal. That's followed by our discounts. In this situation here, we do not have any product returns, so we don't have a product return line, but we do have delivery fees and Blaze Pay card fees, followed by our different taxes. Here we can see that we have our arm's length excise tax is listed on this transaction because we didn't choose to embed that excise tax into our inventory value like we did over in QuickBooks Online. Here in QuickBooks Desktop, we also have our round amount. As you can see, we were able to map that to our total sales offset line, but it is actually our round amount. That kind of goes with that flexibility that we pointed out. You get to dictate what items get used here in QuickBooks to represent the different categories of items that are going to be added. And then we follow that up with our different payment methods. Here we had a debit credit transaction that wasn't Blaze Pay, along with cash, and then follow that with a Blaze Pay payment method. And then just like we had over in QuickBooks Online, we do have an offset line item, again, to accommodate that sales tax rounding. In this situation, it was a 7-cent offset. So here is everything that goes along with the invoice and the payments that we saw in Online. We do also have that cost of goods sold journal entry. Here in my mapping, this time I only had a single cost of goods sold account with a single inventory asset account. So we get this nice short summary cost of goods sold entry. Again, this is just because I've mapped things differently, but hopefully will give you an idea on the flexibility for the mapping capabilities. And finally, we have our bill here in QuickBooks Desktop. It looks very similar to the bill that we saw over in QuickBooks Online. However, with this setup, we did not include excise tax in our inventory value. So we do have our inventory asset line followed by our excise tax line item here in the bill. One thing that the connector currently does not import are any bill payments. So once the bills come over to QuickBooks, you will need to go in and make those payments. So if we paid the vendor with cash out of the vault, we would need to come into QuickBooks and pay this bill using our cash on hand account to get this bill cleared out. Here we have the connector for our QuickBooks Online version. The connector itself is rather simple. When you come in to run it, you're going to select your dispensary, and then you're simply going to push the button for the receipts, let that process, and then push the button for the bills. The connector is going to run from the date that it was last successfully processed. So in this situation, it's going to run our sales data. So it's going to create that invoice, payments, and cost of goods sold journal entry starting on 6/1, and it will run through the previous day in which you're running it. We're not going to create any activity for the current day because the current day is not over and we don't want any partial data in your QuickBooks file. So once that's done running, it's going to pop up. It's going to let us know it's finished. If it ran into any issues, it will pop up with messages letting us know that there were errors. And then we log those, and you can look at those logs to get an idea on what the connector didn't like if the pop-ups weren't sufficient. Let's jump in and take a quick look at the settings themselves. We do have a basic setting that allows you to share the settings or save the settings file in a commonly accessible area. So if you have more than one user that's running the connector, you can share the same settings so the changes only have to be made once and all users will benefit. We have a section for mapping QuickBooks files. So if you have multiple dispensaries, you can map multiple different QuickBooks files and have those available to the connector. And then finally, we have the different entities. And this is where you would set up each individual dispensary. I'm going to go ahead and click on one of these and take a look at the settings a little bit closer. As soon as we click on the dispensary here, it's going to go and it's going to connect to our QuickBooks file. That does take just a moment to get connected, but once you've mapped the QuickBooks file, it's rather rare that you should ever have to go through the QuickBooks login process within the connector again. We're going to hold on to the necessary data so that we can connect to that QuickBooks file over and over whenever necessary. Here is where the mapping takes place. So over in the QuickBooks file, because we are creating an invoice and payments, we do have you create non-inventory items for each one of your product categories, and then service items for all of the other items that you saw on the invoice. So our discount items, our rounding item, our delivery fees, our card processing fees, all of these are mapped, and we give you a list of those items from within your QuickBooks file once you've gotten connected. You get to map each one of the products. So each one of those Blaze product types gets listed here in the connector. We do pull a list of those from Blaze for you. And then you get to map each one of those to the QuickBooks non-inventory item that you've set up. And then here's where you would map the inventory asset account and the cost of goods sold accounts that you would like to use for each one of those categories. We also have a mapping for your payment methods, so we would list each one of your payment methods here, along with what the QuickBooks payment method is, what the deposit to account is, and then in a very rare circumstance where you might give away more of a payment method than you brought in a day. A quick example of that would be we had a dispensary who only processed debit card transactions. Those needed to be rounded up to the nearest $5, and then they gave out cash as change each day. So at the end of the day, they gave out more cash than they brought in. In order to effectively handle this within QuickBooks, we do create a credit memo to relieve that cash, and these fields over here are what are used to help accommodate that situation. And if you do choose to go with the connector, we will walk you through that setup and that process. And then finally, we have the tax mapping. These are the different tax types out of Blaze, and you get to choose whether or not those are included and then map the ones that apply to the dispensary. And when it comes to the bills, we do have just a couple fields for mapping. What is your accounts payable account, and what is the excise tax account that you would like us to use? Up at the top of the connector section here, we do have that checkbox that says include excise tax in COGS. This is really what includes that excise tax within your inventory value. And then we can also include line discounts with the sales amount. So while I mentioned in my two examples that I had in QuickBooks, we were showing you the gross sales. Here you have the option to take line level discounts out of Blaze and actually reduce your product sales by those amounts. So rather than a gross amount, would be more of a net amount that you would see over in QuickBooks. And then finally, if you wanted to break out your sales by adult use and medical use, we do have an option for that. And that gets a little more detailed, but know that you can break out by adult use and medical use. And again, if you do choose to sign up for the connector, we will go over that with you and kind of go through and make sure everything is set up correctly. And we will actually import some data into QuickBooks, review it with you just to ensure that everything is coming across correctly. So that's the gist of our QuickBooks Online connector. Just to give you a quick idea on how quickly that runs, I'm going to run this for a single date. We're going to run it for Friday. We're going to push the sales receipts button here, and we can see that we are connecting to the QuickBooks file. And then as soon as it connects to the QuickBooks file, it's going to begin to read the Blaze data. So now that we've connected, it's reading the different transactions that are over in Blaze. It's going to process those. It's going to do a check to make sure that everything is set up in QuickBooks to apply to that day's sales, and then it's done. And we can jump over here in QuickBooks really quick, and we can see that we do in fact have an invoice for 7/8. Here are my different product category sales. There's my subtotal. We have my discounts, my taxes, my rounding that was used, and then my offset. So just that quick, we brought in sales, we brought in our 2 payments, and we also got our cost of goods sold journal entry that went along with that day's sales. Now let's take a quick look at our QuickBooks Desktop connector. Again, it looks extremely similar to our online connector. It functions exactly the same here. It will keep track of the last time you ran it. And our settings are also very similar. We have that same shared settings folder. We have the same QuickBooks mapping, and we have our different dispensary setup. And all of our mapping is just like it was over in the online connector. So there's a quick introduction to our Blaze to QuickBooks connector, what it is, how it works, along with a quick overview of the activity that is created in both QuickBooks Online and QuickBooks Desktop, along with a quick review of the connector itself, along with the settings that are available. Hopefully with that quick demo you get an idea on the flexibility of the connector that you have with the different mapping capabilities, along with the speed in which the connector is able to pull your data out of Blaze and get it into QuickBooks. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us or your representative over at Blaze. Thank you for your time and have a great day.